Hello everyone, Marc Sabatella here from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is, for those of you who are new, if there's new people here, my regular Thursday series where we talk about making music, talk about composing, arranging, improvising, all sorts of things relating to actual creation of music. And we kind of have a couple of special pieces today because often we're looking at works in progress, smaller works, short pieces, exercises, and so forth. But today we're going to be looking at two longer pieces that are, very well, completed. I mean, maybe you're going to keep working on them. I don't know, but these are a couple of pieces that are. Yeah, they're like major works, I would say. So I'm really looking forward to digging into these, and they're both pieces for strings, and so it'll give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about strings. Now, in the interest of both time and simplicity, what I think I'm going to do. So first, Joel, I'm going to do your piece first. I know that you're often working, and I don't know, or in class or other things. I forget what you have going. But I am going to take a look at your piece first. And if there's stuff that you would like to say about it before we begin, go ahead and be putting it into the chat, and then we can be chatting during the piece. I mean, typing chat while it's playing, and then afterwards I can bring you on to talk if you can be on camera or on mic. But let's first just talk briefly about the piece. So Joel, anything that you want to just type in to tell us, let us know, and then I will start the piece. So I have it loaded into MuseScore 3, which is what you used to create this, because apparently you've been working on it for years, you said. And so it's going to play back, the way that you're accustomed to it sounding. Now, I don't know if when you have been playing this, if you've been using different sound fonts or anything, but we're going to be hearing the default MuseScore sound font on this. So yeah, if you want to say any words before we begin about this, let me know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify the display of this a little bit by turning off the display of invisible items here so that we don't see, because you've got all these invisible tempo markings and other things which are great for the playback sake. And but yeah, they make it a little harder to read. So I've turned off the display of invisible elements so we can see this. And yeah, so this is this is the first movement of string quartet, and I'm assuming you probably haven't, you just finished this movement. I don't know if you've started on the others or not yet, but yeah, this is a longish piece, and so I just want to play it all the way through because it is like one movement, right? As opposed to like Jim's piece that we'll look at separately as three separate movements. We can talk about them separately. So yeah, and I loaded yours into MuseScore 4 and it sounds fabulous, but the balances are totally different because like for instance, these pizzicato pianissimo notes are much, much quieter in MuseScore 4 than they are in MuseScore 3. So yeah, there's a few things like that that are a bit off and, might need adjustment. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just hit play on this, and feel free to be telling us more about it in the chat. People can be asking Joel questions in the chat, and then I'll bring them on to actually speak if that works out. So here we go. Make sure you all tell me, well, I'll put on my other headphones and make sure that it's coming through. Oh, bravo. So excellent job. Yeah, so that is just a beautiful piece with so much going on, and I love that you were able to give that running commentary in there. So I am gonna, I don't, I may or may not have actually asked, but I am gonna invite you to come on board and speak if you like, or you could just continue chatting. It's totally up to you, but you are now invited to co-host, and you could come on and speak if you're comfortable with it. And here you come. So yeah, and I will encourage people, anyone who's here participating, come on and ask any questions you have about the piece. I've got a few of my own questions and a few of my own comments to make, and yeah, we'll go from there. So, Joel, excellent, beautiful.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And my first question: are you hearing any echo?
No, no, no.
All right,
Perfect sound. Yeah,
beautiful, because that's always my concern when I have guests come on is
yeah.
do I have all my buttons pushed correctly to not have echo? So great. So yeah, so tell us a little bit more background wise. What you started this years ago. You said, right?
Yeah, I started this in 2017. I didn't really know anything about composing at the time,
Hmm.
or even writing for strings. But I did have, because of my background in classical music, I studied at the Conservatory of Music of Puerto Rico, and I had a master's degree. I have a master's degree in music education, so
Hmm.
I do know a lot about composing, and because of the experience I had playing music, classical music
And you're a
specifically.
pianist, is that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. Classical pianist. Um, so I did have the knowledge base, Beethoven, I have Schubert, Haydn, Mendelssohn, and Mozart, of course, and all of those. But I never really attempted anything in this scale. So I wrote it. It's basically a first draft. I liked it, but eventually I published it on MuseScore, and for several tries, like hitting uh, swinging and swings and misses, like we say, a lot of swings and misses. Eventually, basically gave up on the project. I do
Hmm.
have on MuseScore the third movement, which is still available. It's
Ah.
public. I just made private the second one because I'm working on the second one. It's already written, but I'm working on it. The third one is already in MuseScore. Anybody who wants to listen to it, I
All
want to make
right.
some changes to it, but it's going to remain basically the same thing. It's on MuseScore right now, but this one gave me a lot of trouble because since it was a sonata form, I wanted to make it a very classical,
Mm-hmm.
typical sonata form, not Beethovenian as such, but more like Schubert or Mendelssohn
Mm-hmm.
in style. That's
Yes.
what I strove for.
And I think that's people, comment about that specifically. It definitely has that vibe. It has that late romantic vibe to it. And
Yeah.
it has that for a number of reasons that I could, say what things strike me that way. But, why don't you say what things like were you specifically emulating or shooting for in that?
Well, I had the first and foremost the first Mendelssohn violin concerto in my mind when I wrote the main melody.
Okay.
Da 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 dee, da da da. It reminds us of dee 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 da dee dee da dee
Okay.
dee
Yeah.
dee da dee da. That's
It has a
Mendelssohn's.
similar character to the
Exactly.
main theme for sure. Is that accompaniment style with the in the violas? Because I've heard the Mendelssohn, but I can't call it to mind.
No, actually, I came up with that because I wanted to give a full bodied accompaniment to it, but since it's only four instruments, and I didn't want any tremolando yet. That was not the idea because it's just starting. The
Mm-hmm.
mood is more pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano stuff. Therefore, I just wanted to have a harmonic accompaniment to it, but not that much that would constrain the melodies because I gave the main melody to the second violin, and there's a counterpoint line on the first violin, then the the shell is playing a pizzicato bass, basically giving the downbeat and and the main note of the chord, but that was it. So the viola had to take up the
Mm-hmm.
accompaniment basically.
Yeah, and one thing that, you and I both being pianists, we're very used to playing those sorts of Alberti bass type figures. Da, 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 right? And so
Exactly.
so we're very accustomed to thinking in those terms, and they do translate to strings, I think, better than most people might imagine,
Yeah.
because it really does translate, but it does get tiring, probably a little bit more, which is why
Yeah.
I mentioned the viola having so much work. But it's great then that you have it do that for a period of time, and then it gets a break
Yeah.
because then it gets other things to do, which is really nice.
Hmm.
But yeah, these figures here, these 16th note figures are basically arpeggiating the chord. That's classic accompaniment technique that works for piano, but it also works really well in this type of setting.
And it's slow, so the viola won't be tired all that much, except for
Yeah,
the next section, the recapitulation section, which is
faster.
a sexploit. Yeah, it's faster.
Yes. And the
By the
thing
way,
is, oh, go ahead. I was going to say
there
about it being slow is the downside of being slow means it takes longer.
it takes longer a little bit. Yeah. There's just somebody who asked me, Joe, how do you drum up the main
Yes.
music in your head? Well, I just said I wanted to make it in on those lines: Schubert, Schumann, Brahms, a little bit of Beethoven, but not that much that it would sound like them.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, late romantic stuff because that's how I feel the music in my mind. I feel the music romantic.
Yes. And one thing that I will say about melody, and maybe you could give your opinion on this. I always find coming up with a melody to be the hardest to explain. It's maybe the most magical part of composition, where it shows up and it's there, and there's the melody, and it's something that is very primal, like children come up with good melodies. Any lots of people come up with good melodies,
Hmm.
and so the hard part usually isn't coming up with the good melody. It's all the other craft of putting the thing together. On the other hand, without a good melody, you're stuck, and so you have to wait for
Yeah.
that inspiration. It's hard to force a good melody to come out.
Yeah, that's why the great melodists are the people we like the most in the classical repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
Mozart, Chopin, we have Schubert, we have Mendelssohn himself, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff. Those people are have memorable melody. That's why
Yes.
we love them so much.
Yeah, and some people are like especially renowned for their melodies, and then will get like sort of criticized as well. They're not very good at developing or whatever, and I always find that to be an empty criticism personally. But I guess I understand it. But
Hmm.
the melody is such a strong carrying thing of a piece. Like I was at a performance of just listening to a performance of Nutcracker last month, and it's like for anyone else that would be like a career greatest hits of melody, right? But for someone who's a melodicist, that's just one piece.
Exactly, like Tchaikovsky, like you say. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
um, one of the great melodies he wrote is one of the her earliest works, which is Romeo and Juliet.
Oh yeah,
What a
yeah,
melody, and
yeah.
it's one of thousands he wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, he's definitely an example of someone, just great melodicist, great orchestrator also.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many things going on, and I just want to focus on a couple things. I mentioned that contrapuntal section, which you call a fugato, which is a term I've seen, but I don't know a technical definition of it. Can you tell us what you mean when you call it that?
Yeah, Fugato is basically a small fugue or a small fugal section in which you have the same. It's basically the exposition of a fugue. The
Okay.
expo- yeah. So those of people who might be here that don't know what a how fugue works, you have the first subject, and by the way, it has a very specific vocabulary to it. It's not a theme; it's a subject. So
Right.
we have the main subject coming up on the cello. It's the second theme that we have. Remember, it's a sonata form. So again, parenthesis, sonata form is a very complex yet compact way of composing music, which is basically an ABA form with a lot of development in it. The first part being the exposition, where you have basically three main parts: the main theme, the transitional theme, you have the second theme, and then you have the ending theme with which can be any of those before.
And I would say, like, a lot of, like, usually when sonata form is described, it's described in terms of two themes, but that transitional part can definitely take on a third theme, and yours
Yes.
definitely does. You definitely
Yes.
went there with it.
Yeah, I gave it the character of the theme because it came from the last section of the second theme, the very romantic melodic line that the first violin was playing. the last part, ta da dee dee da 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 dee. Well, I transformed into da 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 dee, da 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 dee, da 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 dee,
Right.
da 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 dee, and then the second or the second part of the second section, transitional section. That sounds pretty much like a Bach, the beginning of a
Yeah.
Bach shoot. That's exactly where it comes from, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, a
And it,
violin
yeah, it
suite.
definitely has that, that idea, that sound of being that late Baroque, early classical type of
Yeah.
feel in that section for sure.
So this Figaro, the theme comes from because remember now this Figaro is a central part of the development section, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's
Hmm.
developing on the themes that came before, mixing and matching, shortening them up, and making it longer, etc., etc. You know, the composer can go a thousand ways that he or she can do it. What I did is I took that section, that little theme from the Figaro, ta dee da da, dee da da da. Well, that comes from the second section, the development,
Mm,
starting the exposition. The second section, ta dee da da, dee da
right.
da, dee da da.
It's related to that melody, and yet it's developed, so it's different.
It's
But
developed
this, yeah,
exactly.
yeah, I've missed where that section is,
It's
but
it's
it's
a little bit further on.
yeah.
There you go, a little bit more.
Here we
There
go.
you go.
Ba
Yeah.
da 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 da. Right, so it's that theme, turned into a something that works as a fugue subject.
Exactly. And then I changed it a little bit and I mixed it with some of the other themes to make it more suitable for a fugal subject because the way it is originally doesn't work as a fugal subject. So it starts out in cello.
I went too far.
Yeah, there you go.
There we
It
go.
starts out in cello, and
Hmm.
then the second entrance is called a tonal entrance because it's not exactly the same as the main melody.
And it's at the fifth, so it's following the sort of I don't read alto clef fast enough to do. I have to do the math on it, but I can tell that is in fact an F sharp going to a B, which is
Exactly.
basically this up a fifth, which is what we
Exactly.
expect. But so you've made some tonal adjustments in there,
Yeah.
which I'm taking your word for because again, not being able to read the clef fast enough,
Yeah.
I totally believe that there's adjustments in there.
So, and then the third entrance, they are called sometimes stunted entrances. The third entrance is in the second violin.
Hmm.
It's exactly the same as in the cello. And then the third entrance is exactly the same as in the viola. It's in the first violin. And
Gotcha.
then you go on and have many ways in which you can develop counterpoint without having the the forbidden of parallel fifth or eighth. And I worked them through, and it's called a Figaro because I only have the exposition.
Right. At this point, everyone has stated the theme. If it was a full fugue, then there would be more counterpoint developing of that
Exactly.
theme in fugal type style. But at this point, you've stated the theme, and now you're developing it by bringing in actually the original theme that it was based on, and then doing more classic types of accompaniment rhythms and so forth.
Yeah, and I also I'm trying to reroute the ship, if you will, because we want to go back to the recapitulation. The
Hmm.
recapitulation should be in A minor, and now we are in E minor. We are in the fifth minor. We have
Hmm.
to turn it somehow into the dominant to go back into A major. So what I did here, I ended the exposition in B major,
Here's the B.
which, if you're keeping track, is the second major of A minor, or the fifth or the dominant of E major, and I do what's called a stretto, in which I
Hmm.
start the entrances, and before the main entrance has finished, the second one enters.
Right.
They're basically stepping in everybody's toes.
Yeah, so instead of everyone in the first part of the fugato, everyone gets a full statement of the theme. The first statement, the subject is stated in full before the next entrance. The stretto is because now the viola starts the process, and then the second violin comes in one measure later. Doesn't wait for the viola to finish. That's
Yes,
stretto.
exactly. That's just called stretto. By the way, stretto is an Italian word That means as accelerated. So
Ah,
that's
I didn't.
basically that's what it means.
Okay.
Yeah, stretto means it's an accelerated thing, whatever. It's not necessarily a musical term. Um, it's a common term in Italian. But stretto, it's basically when you start out the second theme without the first one having even finished.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically stepping on it, and then the four voices, and it creates a uh, very nice effect. But what I actually was trying to do is constraining myself because I didn't want to go overboard with the fugue because I did have to finish the development because it's
Mm-hmm.
within a section. This is
Right.
not a fugue itself. So I ended up the whole thing in B major, but on the first inversion, we have the D sharp on the
Right here.
cello, exactly, and then I start bringing it back to make that B chord the actual dominant to E major.
And then you can be back in E. Yeah.
Exactly. And
And
I basically go back to certain other themes that I used, but my main focus is here, keeping it, making it calm down a little bit because I'm going back into the recapitulation. And as you said, now the recapitulation is full body,
mm-hmm.
it's a has octaves in the violins playing the melody, the viola is playing a sextuplet, basically the same thing but
But
much
sextuplets.
faster. The the sextuplets and then the cellos playing the triplets. It sounds bigger, wider, and more difficult for the players actually.
And
But
that's worth mentioning also that a recapitulation in a lot of like especially early classical works is literally copy and paste, right? I mean it's the same exact material played exactly the same way with only minor tweaks like changing the key of the secondary theme or whatever. But your recapitulation is much more of a romantic style of saying, "Hey, we got more music to play. Let's orchestrate it differently. Let's make it
exactly.
bigger. Let's make it more dramatic. Let's do something to honor the fact that we've come this far and we need to respond to what we've already heard."
And that's exactly what it is. It's a very, very typical romantic era device in the sonata form. Chopin used it to great effect. He used a lot of um, variations. Schumann did the same thing, but the great master, the one that was
Mm-hmm.
Brahms. Brahms used the variation within the sonata form. It blows your mind. So I was
Yeah.
thinking more like Brahms in this section, how he used the sonata form. Um, we have a question here. Parallel fifth are the forbidden fruit, is what I've gathered in the month I've returned to art music. Well, the real reason is it's a cliche, to be honest, because then Debussy and Ravel break away from that totally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really forbidden for no reason, but in it goes back to medieval music where the composers wanted to create different lines for each voice, and they correctly, I think, assumed that the fifth and the eighth are the perfect intervals, and if you play them in parallels, you won't have actually any kind of counterpoint. You will have a repetition of the same notes. So they forbid the fifth and the eighth to play in parallel with each other. There are some others that can't play in parallel, like the thirds and the sixth, but the fifth and the eighth cannot. That went all the way up until the Romantic era,
Yeah.
and since I'm trying to compose something in the Romantic era sound, I respected that rule, but it's not really forbidden fruit whatsoever. You
Yeah,
can use
it
it
has its own
whichever way.
sound, and once
Exactly.
you accept that sound, you're like, okay, when I want that sound, I'm going to use that sound. But it isn't the sound of the Baroque. It's not the sound of the Renaissance. So it's a new sound, as far as that goes.
Yeah,
It's actually an
totally.
older sound. It predates the Renaissance, but that's what they were sort of reacting as. Ooh, that was a little too raw, and let's do fancier stuff. And then eventually they came back and said, nah, that rawness is actually kind of nice.
And by the way, this is a very fun fact that I found out when I was studying a Bach fugue. To me, the greatest fugue he ever wrote, which was the Saint Anne organ fugue.
Hmm.
It's in the Clavier Among Three. He wrote the prelude at the beginning, then he wrote that masterpiece for organ, and then he wrote the fugue at the end. But some people just put the prelude and the fugue together, and that fugue goes around. It's a five voice fugue, and bad works around it to create sometimes parallel fifth and eighth, but
Hmm.
they are dressed up in a certain way that they are
Interesting.
technically not parallel, but they go to another voice. But the raw effect when you see your hands, it's a parallel fifth or parallel eighth. Yeah, uh,
Okay. Huh.
yeah. So that's basically what I did, and then the
Yeah.
rest of the recapitulation is it's a copy and paste of the first section,
Right.
but I did change the keys
Sure.
to arrive into when I arrived in the exposition, the second section arrived in C major, which is typical. You start in the minor key and then you transition into the parallel or the relative major key, C major. But now I started to work on it so that we arrived in it in A major instead of C major.
Okay.
Uh, and they brought us places. Very nice
Yeah.
workaround harmonically. And then from then on, it ends with what Beethoven liked to call the developmental coda, which is that you don't finish when it's supposed to finish, but you add a little extra
Yeah.
developmental section at the end. And for example, all of his symphonies, there's a common here. Beethoven is a beast when it comes to melodies in his sonatas and symphonies. Beethoven is the role model for sonata form, period.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, every composer after him, they didn't forget Mozart or Haydn, but they
Hmm.
didn't follow Mozart or Haydn, they followed Beethoven.
Sure.
Because
Yeah,
he
because
was,
he brought so much more to the table, also, and it's like it's you can't not recognize that when you're writing your own music.
yeah, so that's basically it. That it's a
Great.
long movement.
Yeah.
Again, I'm working on the second one. It's already I took it away from MuseScore because I'm working
Just
on it. The third
gotcha.
one, if you wanna
Yeah, go
go
ahead and
check it
post the
out.
link in the back in the community, and so that people can find that and we can
Yeah,
listen
yeah.
to it.
When I finish it, I'm definitely gonna post it here in the community and
Great.
let it known. It's in a preview to it. It's in a Puerto Rican type style of
Nice.
music. I'm Puerto Rican, so
Hmm.
so it's called a Puerto Rican danza, and it's what it sounds like. It's beats to be danced. It's basically an archaic form in Puerto Rico. Nobody plays it or listen
Hmm.
to it anymore. But it has basically survived in the classical music uh, community as a style, or not a style. It's more like a traditional Puerto Rican styled music that we play on the piano. In the conservatory music, you have to play two while you are in your bachelor's degree, and it's just the way it is.
Okay.
And it's in a
Well,
Puerto Rican style music. It's gonna be very beautiful, and I like what's coming out. So whenever it's done, I'll let you know.
all right. Well, we look forward to it. All right. I need to wrap up so we can move on and hear Jim's piece. But thank you again so much for the music. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So, this was Joel's piece. And as mentioned, I want to. I want to do the same now with Jim, your piece. If you have comments you want to post in the chat while we, prepare to listen to it, you've posted some about the story. Is there? It's a response to recent events in Afghanistan, and it's definitely a dark piece. And I just want to grab where it is here. So, because we're going to listen to it on MuseScore.com, because he's got all his tweaks that he's made to the playback using MuseScore 4, but using the effects. So he has done things using the MuseScore, the Muse FX effects that are still new. I mean, these have only been around for like weeks. So Jim is now like the reigning expert, as far as I'm concerned, on Muse FX, and it's going to be a learning process for us all to kind of come to terms with this. So in any case, I'm going to go ahead and start playing this because this is another piece that's got some stuff going on. In fact, let's see, it's I think not as long, 7 minutes. But it's in three separate movements, and so we're just going to play them through and then talk a little bit more about what's going on in them. And yeah, it's some really great music that I think you all are going to enjoy. It's of a different character. So let me just bring back the chat here so that I'm looking at it. And here we go with, I don't know how you were supposed to pronounce this one. Triptychos, maybe Triptychos, because triptych is a threesome thing in a painting. In any case, here's the piece, and I'm looking to see if I missed any comments from Jim. I know I see you on the participant list, but hopefully you're actually around and can be commenting. And then at the end, we can have you come on and talk a little bit if you're available. So here is Jim Ivy's piece. Yes. Wonderful, Jim. And it's interesting that both of these pieces, sort of after all that's gone on, end with a 5-1, gesture there. It's just beautiful piece, haunting, so much going on. Love it. And so, yeah, I'm going to invite you as well to come on if you would like to come on and speak. I know sometimes we've had microphone issues when I've had you come on before, but one of the things, so there's so many things to talk about here. One of them, though, that you had originally mentioned was deliberately wanting to create something not so tonal. And, this is a not tonal piece. And the first and third movements, especially. The second movement isn't tonal specifically, and yet it it feels more like C major, right? Because there aren't a lot of accidentals in the second section, and yeah, it's not harmonically clear, and so it ends up feeling like a tonal a visit to tonality, let's say, while not necessarily living there. So that let me make sure that did I do the invite thing? Invite to co-host. So I might have missed the button. So in any case, so it feels like the second section provides a little relief from the darkness of the first, and then the third movement to me, is like tying together the first two. It's like sometimes when you write music in multiple movements, the movements are like entirely separate. And this, I feel like, I'm assuming you made a deliberate effort to tie the movements together because the third movement feels like it's borrowing much from the first two. That's my sense of the matter, anyhow. So, so yeah, that's how I would describe things. And there's a similar thing when I'm talking about the tonality. There's a similar thing going on rhythmically in that, okay, you have the first section notated in 5/4, and yet, yeah, so the same motifs is what helps tie them together for sure, and that reintroduction of the ba-da-dum in the second movement especially. But then the third movement bringing both of them together. But the rhythmic thing here, I mean, it's written in 5/4, and yet there's not like a sense of 5/4 as a pulse, which is sort of interesting because like 5/4 is like one of these pulses that's like so like sort of cliched, at least like in the jazz world, that take five, ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, bum. And if you're going to write in five, it's going to be this very specific rhythmic figure that's going to excuse the writing in five. And yet it doesn't need to be that. It's just a way in this piece and in some other pieces of not feeling like you have a pulse, and yet still having it have a consistent pattern of the same number of beats in every measure. Now, this section here, there is no pulse at all, right? These little figures are, not they're not lining up with the bar lines in any obvious particular way. But there's other places like this. The melody that happens here is, to me, feels like it's an expansive version of a 5/4 melody. And I'm mentioning this because then in the second movement, it's written in cut time, and yet there's places here. Oh, wait a minute. Is it the second movement or the third that I'm thinking of? Oh, yes. Starting in this section here, I feel like the bar lines are not necessarily where I feel the pulse. Like this is starting here, and maybe it's that section, bump, 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 those bump, bump, bump figures, it's not even clear where the pulse really is. And I think, as Jim said, you weren't necessarily thinking metrically. And I feel like that's carried into the second movement. The 16th note passages have a strong sense of metricness to them. But some of these passages, and like the way these passages sort of overlap themselves, and then where's that place where there's like a hemiola figure going on? Is it here? Here? Yeah, so there's, places where we hear a figure that I guess that's not as much of a hemiola as I thought it was. Maybe there was another place where I was hearing the hemiola. So yeah, the bar lines are that is the point that I would make there. The bar lines are not significant events in this piece in the way they often would be. And yet, this isn't like, there's a whole ton of music of the last century of which this is true. It's a tradition that I'll associate with Stravinsky if we're gonna point to particular places. And some of his pieces have like crazy time signature changes, and yet when you listen to them, you're barely aware of a pulse at all. I mean, you're aware of a pulse, but not a meter. And so I feel like that's going on here, and it's not going to be harder to it's not going to be harder to conduct than Rite of Spring. Let's put it that way. And then the third movement here, it's interesting that we have the contrapuntal section, the fugato section in Joel's piece, because you also have a counterpoint going on here, some imitative counterpoint between the voices here. And yeah, I don't know that I would recommend the rewriting of to put the bar lines. I mean, I don't know. It's a judgment call. And I haven't spent enough time with the piece. I mean, I've listened to it a couple times to really understand if there's a strong reason to move the bar lines around by changing meters. But I sort of suspect there isn't. And that for simplicity, just keeping it in 1 meter is probably certainly simplifies the conductor's job. Just get that pattern going and hope everyone meets up. But yeah, that's it's this to me, it's like the rhythmic equivalent of atonality, of saying, well, there's a pulse, but there's not a specific meter. They're gestures that make sense in and of themselves, just like harmonically these lines make sense in and of themselves, even if they don't add up to specific chords. So yeah, here's a section where there's some more of that interplay between the beats and where these lines are lining up, right? Right. Was there a one in there? I don't know that there was a meaningful place for there to be beat one in there, and it doesn't matter. There doesn't need to be. So yeah, there's this tension and release dynamic that we expect in music, and usually there's a certain balance between how much tension and how much release, where the releases happen. And this piece has, because of all of these elements that I'm talking about, more tension perhaps than average. And I think that's totally fitting. Your whole goal in writing this piece has to do with tension. And so yeah, that tension, that anger that you're mentioning in the comment there, definitely comes through in the feeling of a lot of these things. Now, there is something about the second movement that does have a little more joyful quality to it, I would say. The second movement is this is the one that feels the most tonal, and it's the one that feels the lightest in mood. It's, all those fast 16th notes are part of it, but also just the nature of the themes make the second movement feel, more, I don't know, optimistic or something. I mean, it's hard not to feel good about a C major triad, right? I mean, that's going to make you smile. And yeah, the pace of this is pretty frenetic, and with all the 16th notes in it, it has tension, even while saying, hey, I'm playing a C major scale and a C major triad, but there's still something about this that's not just, puppies playing in the meadow, which is what you might expect something that was so C major to come across. This doesn't come across like that at all. And then there's that, section, there's a sort of a polytonal section where you have that A flat. Is that here? Yeah, so you've got this like A flat major scale coming down. And as far as we know, I mean, that's an A flat major scale. But then there's this so I'm assuming that is not a typo, and you really intend an A natural there in the cello, because it creates this lovely grading tension of this thing that's just a plain diatonic A flat scale melody, and yet then we hear it against this dissonance below it. So I mean, if that was a typo, keep it. But I'm assuming you listened to this enough that you did that on purpose. And yeah, it has this tension and release built into just the playing of a major scale. And I think that's pretty brilliant how that works. So yeah, so much going on here to really enjoy. And you mentioned that you were invited to submit this to a symphony, and yeah, I certainly hope that that it gets seriously considered and performed, because this would be a fabulous piece to hear performed. Now, I should mention Joel's piece was specifically string quartet, right? One violin, or two violins, first violin, second violin, viola, and cello, four people exactly. Your piece here is written for a string orchestra, so this isn't meant to be one violin, but a violin section, a violin two section, a viola section, a cello section, and a bass section, right? So it's a string orchestra, I'm assuming here. And I feel like, yeah, I mean, this piece, most pieces written for a string orchestra would probably work for a string quintet also, but a lot about what makes this piece what it is, benefits from having that the strength in numbers, basically. So, yeah, so this is just a wonderful piece. So many wonderful things going on, and we touched on some of them. And I definitely encourage all of you listening to check out, go listen online. Also, in the community, find the posts there, comment on them, ask more questions if you like. Really, some wonderful music there. So I want to thank you, Jim, also for this music and for your comments here in the chat as well as in the community about your process and so forth. So some great music we've been hearing here, both from Joel and Jim. Thank you so much. So that said, I do want to wrap things up. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Thanks for the comments. Thanks for the questions. And let's go ahead and flip out with a little more string music, something a little light and fluffy, my theme music that we've heard so many times. And thanks again, Joel. Thanks again, Jim. And this has been a really wonderful exploration of some larger forms, and specifically looking at string music. And Jim, you've posted that really nice guide to the video with the articulations and so forth. And yeah, I want to be discussing orchestration more, which is a topic I love, but it's not like one where I feel I have like great expertise, and so I'm looking at wanting to create an environment where we can all learn orchestration together. So that's something to be looking forward to. Meanwhile, I hope everyone has a great week, and I will see you all next time.